They say that nothing enters your life by chance. If these words are reaching you now, it is because somewhere in the silent corridors of your being, a door is ready to open. For thousands of years, across the shifting sands and endless skies of Egypt, priests guarded a mystery so profound that it was spoken of only in whispers inside temple walls. A mystery that was not carved into stone for all to see, but hidden in sound itself, in two living frequencies known as Hu and Ka. They were not considered symbols, nor poetic metaphors, but the very breath of life, currents of energy that could transform the human body into a radiant temple of vibration. The ancients called them the two keys, for together they unlocked the architecture of the soul. Who was the first key? It was the sound of remembrance, a tone that cleared the static of life, returning a person to their original frequency, the unique vibration that existed before sorrow, before fear, before forgetting. Ka was the second key. It was the current of ignition, the spark that surged through the body once the static was cleared, igniting the life force and awakening the hidden fire within. One without the other was incomplete. Who aligned the instrument? Ka played it. Who tuned the temple gates? Ka lit the flame inside. To the modern ear, these may sound like fragments of myth, but to the Egyptians they were as real as breath and stone. Imagine standing in a temple chamber, light pouring in shafts through narrow windows, the air thick with frankincense. The priests begin with Hu, a deep tone that vibrates in your bones, not just your ears. The sound doesn't seem to come from outside. It rises inside you, clearing a pathway in the field of energy that surrounds your body. As the tone fades, stillness deepens, and then Ka moves. It does not enter as sound but as current, a warmth rising through your chest, a subtle electricity awakening your cells, the sense that your body is both rooted in earth and lit from within by stars. This is what the ancients meant when they spoke of frequency as medicine. Who was the sacred sound that restored harmony? Ka, the sacred current that filled that harmony with life. One aligned, the other activated. And together they did not merely heal, they transformed. The priests believed that every human being carried Ka from their very first breath, a spark of divinity planted in the soul's architecture. But for many, it lay dormant, waiting for Hu to awaken it. Forgetting Ka was considered the greatest loss, for it was not the body that truly died, but the current that dimmed. Even now, across centuries, the idea strikes us with a strange familiarity. Have you ever noticed how a single sound, a chant, a hum, even a whispered word, can shift your mood, steady your breath, or still your racing mind? The Egyptians believed this was no coincidence but a remembrance of the same principle. Sound was not entertainment, it was alignment. Breath was not mechanical, it was sacred architecture. To them, Hu and Ka were not techniques to be practiced, but transmissions, living forces that could be invited, felt, and carried. Today, modern science edges toward what the ancients seemed to know, that vibration influences physiology, that frequency alters states of mind, that coherence in breath calms the nervous system. But where science measures, the Egyptians lived. They walked inside this truth daily, cultivating resonance until the body itself became a temple that radiated coherence. And so, when you hear of Hu and Ka, you are not hearing about relics of a forgotten religion. You are being invited to remember something already written into your own breath and heartbeat. Hu and Ka are not locked in pyramids, nor hidden in scrolls. They are living keys, waiting to be turned. One clears, the other ignites. One aligns, the other activates. Together, they whisper an ancient promise. You were never just flesh and bone. You are vibration, current, frequency. And when Hu and Ka awaken, you do not merely live. You become luminous. This is the beginning of the mystery. The first key. The sound of remembrance. And beyond it, the current that waits to rise. Two frequencies, two keys, one truth echoing across millennia, that the body is a temple, and the temple is alive. Long before medicine, before the pyramids rose like frozen hymns to the sky, before even the sound of Hu was invoked to restore harmony, there was Ka. The second key. To the Egyptians, Ka was not just an idea or symbol. It was life itself, the unseen current that pulsed beneath flesh and bone. They believed that at the very moment of your first breath, Ka entered, a golden spark of divine essence flowing from the infinite field into the architecture of your soul. And with your final exhale, Ka did not die. It carried your essence beyond the veil, into the endless current of eternity. Ka was the sacred current that moved through your breath, your heartbeat, and your cells. It was the animating fire hidden inside the clay of the body. Without Ka, the body was an empty vessel. With Ka, it became a temple alive with vibration. The priests of the Nile called Ka the second key, because if who cleared the instrument, Ka was the music that poured through it. If who aligned, Ka activated. If who reminded you of who you were, Ka gave you the power to live as that truth. In secret chambers of stone, Ka was spoken of not as metaphor, but as living frequency. They described it as the breath of the gods within human form, an energy technology so profound it transformed the body into a living temple of light. Imagine standing within those chambers, walls carved with arms lifted toward the heavens, not decorative images but energy codes, designed to awaken the current. The priests taught that Ka was not learned, not given by ritual or external authority. It was already there, planted like a seed within you, waiting for remembrance. Waiting for who to open the channel. And yet, Ka could be forgotten. That, the priests warned, was the only true loss in life. Wealth, power, even health could fade, but so long as Ka flowed, the soul remained radiant. But when Ka was forgotten, when the current was dimmed by fear, grief, or disconnection, life lost its brilliance. A person might walk, speak, and breathe, yet their inner flame would flicker low. To the ancients, this was a tragedy deeper than death itself. Consider the boldness of their vision. They believed Ka was given at birth, not as metaphorical soul, but as a measurable living current. To them, Ka was evidence that humanity was not a random collection of cells, but part of a cosmic architecture of energy and vibration. Every inhale was a reminder of the divine spark. Every heartbeat was proof that the current had not left. Ka was ignition, the fire after the stillness, the current after the silence. Who tuned the temple, Ka made it alive. Who was remembrance, Ka was activation. One without the other left the body incomplete. Without who, Ka was wild, power without harmony. Without Ka, who was still, perfection without movement. Together, they completed the circuit of human divinity. And so, in the initiation rites, once who had cleared the static, Ka was invoked. Not as sound, but as presence. The initiate would feel it surge, a golden river through the nervous system, charging every cell with vibrational medicine. Their breath would deepen, their chest would warm, their skin would glow with a subtle radiance. The priest said that in this moment, the body became a living temple, not a place of worship carved in stone, but a radiant vessel carrying the current of the gods. Ka was not an inheritance to be guarded, nor a gift to be begged for. It was already yours, woven into your being since the very first inhale. And though the world could make you forget, no force could take it away. To remember Ka was to ignite the flame of life itself. To forget Ka was to live dimly, like a lamp unlit in a room that once knew light. You do not need to stand before the pyramids to find Ka. You do not need a priest to call it down from the heavens. Ka has never left you. It waits in your breath, in your heartbeat, in the silent spaces between thoughts. And when who meets Ka, when remembrance opens the channel and the current surges forward, your energy field shifts instantly. The heart grows lighter. The breath flows deeper. The mind grows still. And your body hums with the resonance of creation itself. This is the second key. Once it is turned, you will never vibrate the same way again. They named it the living double because, to the Egyptians, a human being was more than flesh and memory. It was two presences walking together, one seen, one unseen. Ka was that unseen companion, the mirror current that mirrored your body's life from the first inhale to the last exhale. Where modern parlance might reach for the word soul and come away vague, The Egyptians drew a precise picture. Ka was a palpable force, a current that could be felt, weakened, restored, and even trained. It accompanied you through danger and comfort alike, a second presence that made the body more than a machine. It made it a temple with a twin flame inside. The hieroglyph that represented Ka, two arms lifted to the sky, was not merely an artistic flourish. It read like an instruction. I receive the current of life. I lift myself to that which gives. I stand open to the flow. In a culture that wrote theology into stone, such a glyph was a code pointing to an experiential practice, not an abstract doctrine. The priests taught that Ka entered at the first breath, an act of cosmic hospitality. The infinite field reaches down and breathes a portion of itself into a newborn body. For the Egyptians, birth was not only the start of a life story but a literal infusion of current, the divine architecture sliding into the human frame. This current was believed to persist after bodily death as well. Ka did not disintegrate with the corpse but moved on in a continuum the priests called the subtle field of the gods. Yet within life, Ka could dim. The ancients observed what we still observe now, that a person might be present in the world yet absent in radiance. Grief could draw the current inward, fear could clog its pathways, and the chatter of a disconnected mind could lead Ka to shrink into a whisper. That whisper was a kind of living absence, the body functioning but the temple's altar cold. The Egyptians refused to treat this as mere metaphor. They made it a clinical, spiritual concern. That is why their rites were part healing, part technology, breath and sound used as instruments to restore resonance. They believed breath opened the channels, and certain sacred sounds completed the transmission. The priests employed tones, like the sacred syllable often transliterated as he, to sweep static from the field and invite the current to surge. Sound in those chambers was not decoration, it was energetic surgery. A sustained tone could rearrange the field around the body the way a smith tempers metal, by changing its internal vibration. When breath and tone met, the effect was not merely psychological but somatic. The chest warmed as if kindled, the spine felt lit from within, and a person's presence shifted from dim to luminous. History often reduces ancient ritual to superstition, but watch closely and you see a proto-psychophysiology. Regulated breath calms the nervous system, vocal toning modulates internal pressure and resonance, and together they alter perception and hormone states. The Egyptians refined these practices into initiation sequences. An initiate did not simply recite words, they embodied a process. In the early stages, breath was taught as a technology, slow, deep inhalations that expanded the chest and created a receptive field. Then came the sound, a low hum that rolled through the bones and the ether surrounding them. The priest's instruction was precise. Do not strain. Let the tone fill you until it steadies the heart and clears the subtle pathways. When Ka flowed fully, the changes were visible. Eyes brightened with a peculiar clarity as if small suns had taken up residence behind the pupils. The skin carried a faint radiance, not ornamental glow but the outward sign of an inner coherence. Voices deepened and carried a resonance that made speech feel like an offering. Those who carried Ka in fullness, the texts imply, were not merely healthier, they inhabited a field that influenced others. Presence became contagious. Strangers felt steadied by proximity. In essence, Ka was an energetic grammar for living, one that framed how the Egyptians moved through illness, grief, power, and devotion. Where Western narratives often separate body and spirit, the Egyptian outlook merged them. Health was a matter of currents and channels, of cleaned passages and returned flow. Yet their teaching carried an ethical dimension too. Because Ka was a current that could be strengthened by care, the community had responsibility to sing, to tend the dying, to help clear the blockages of those whose current had dimmed. Funerary rites, offerings, and recitations were not merely sentimental, they were practical attempts to re-establish the continuity of Ka between worlds. To forget Ka, then, was understood as the deepest human failure. Not a failure of faith but a failure of presence. You could be wealthy, powerful, learned. None of it mattered if the current that made you a living temple was muted. This is why priests guarded not only ritual sequences but also the language of invocation. The proper tone and the proper breath were technologies passed from teacher to initiate. And yet the message embedded in their secrecy was oddly democratizing. Ka was not reserved for kings alone. It was sown into every child at birth. There was nothing to purchase or inherit beyond the remembering. The priest's work was to teach the memory back into being. We can translate their practice into a contemporary insight. The current is accessible through attention. Pause, breathe, tone with intention. These ordinary acts are the very mechanics the ancients used to awaken Ka. The real alchemy was not the acquisition of a new thing but the recollection of what was always present. The Egyptian life force invites us to see ourselves as living systems with currents that respond to care and attention. It tells us that the temple we long for is not a place to reach but a state to remember. When that remembrance happens, Ka is not merely restored. It becomes a way of living, an embodied coherence that turns a walking body into a radiant field, a visible echo of an invisible current. And in that echo lies the promise the ancients offered. Life returned to its original vibrational shape, luminous and whole. The Nile was more than a river. To the ancient Egyptians, it was the breath of the gods, a vein of divine life pulsing through the desert, binding heaven and earth. Every rise of its waters, every flood that spread fertile soil across the land, was not merely a natural cycle, it was a cosmic message. The priests of the temples read its currents like scripture, believing the Nile carried not just water, but sacred knowledge, mysteries as deep as the universe itself. But what were these mysteries? And why did the Egyptians guard them so fiercely? When we step back into the temples of Karnak, Luxor, or Abydos, we see walls that speak without words. Carvings of gods offering the Ankh, the symbol of eternal life, to kings and pharaohs. Serpents intertwined with lotus flowers. Falcons soaring above men. None of these images were simply decorative. Each one was part of a grand symbolic code, a language that spoke to both the initiate and the ordinary eye. To the untrained, it was religion. To the trained, it was science, a science of the soul. The Nile itself was seen as a mirror of the Milky Way, a flowing counterpart to the heavens. Priests believed that just as the stars followed their eternal patterns above, so too did the Nile's floods follow rhythms tied to celestial alignments. The rising of Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, marked the annual flooding. To the Egyptian mind, this was not coincidence. It was proof that heaven and earth were bound in a single pulse. And here lies the hidden teaching. The Egyptians did not separate the natural from the divine. Every grain of sand, every drop of water, every breath of air was charged with spirit. They saw life not as a collection of accidents, but as a vast design. And at the center of this design was a power they called Heka, the sacred force that animated creation. Heka was not magic in the way we imagine spells and illusions today. It was the vital energy that allowed words to become reality, prayers to shape destiny, and symbols to bend the unseen. To the priests, the Nile itself was saturated with Heka. Drinking its waters, bathing in it, offering libations to the gods. These were acts of alignment with the cosmic current. The river was in their eyes a liquid scripture. This knowledge was not for all. It was layered, guarded carefully in temple schools. At the outer level, farmers learned rituals of thanksgiving to Hapi, the Nile god. At the inner level, initiates learned how rhythm, vibration, and word could influence not just crops, but human destiny itself. And still deeper, at the level hidden behind stone walls and secret chambers, a final teaching emerged, that the Nile's rhythm was the same rhythm that pulsed through the human body. Its floods mirrored the flow of blood through veins, the rising of breath in the lungs, the circulation of life force energy within. To master the Nile was to master oneself. We might ask, why all the secrecy? Why did this wisdom not flow freely, like the river itself? Because to the Egyptians, knowledge was power, and power was dangerous in the wrong hands. To speak a sacred word without understanding its resonance was to risk imbalance. To misuse Heka was to unravel harmony. So the priests veiled their wisdom in stories, myths, and rituals, making sure only those who proved worthy could glimpse the deeper current. One such myth is the story of Osiris, slain and cast into the Nile, only to be resurrected through the devotion of Isis. On the surface, it is a tale of love and rebirth. Beneath the surface, it encodes the teaching that death itself is not an ending but a passage, that the life force flows endlessly in cycles, just as the Nile floods and recedes. To the Egyptians, Osiris was the Nile. His dismemberment was the scattering of the waters, his resurrection the renewal of the land. And through this myth, they taught initiates that humans, too, could undergo such resurrection, not in body, but in consciousness. When we examine these mysteries today, we cannot help but wonder, what else was hidden in plain sight? Were the pyramids not merely tombs, but massive machines for channeling energy? Were the temples not merely shrines, but living textbooks in stone? And was the Nile not merely a river, but a reflection of the great river of stars above, a reminder that human life is inseparably bound to cosmic life? The deeper we look, the clearer the Egyptian vision becomes. They lived not in separation but in integration. To them, heaven was not elsewhere, nor was the divine locked away in some unreachable realm. The divine was in the very breath you took, in the soil beneath your feet, in the current of the river flowing by. The Nile was both a physical blessing and a metaphysical teacher. This is the hidden legacy of the Nile mysteries. A reminder that true wisdom is not carved into stone, but woven into the very rhythm of nature. And if we, too, learn to listen, not with the ears, but with the soul, we may hear what the ancients heard, the river speaking, whispering of eternity. The question remains, did the Egyptians guard this wisdom because they feared its misuse, or because they knew it was too vast, too powerful, for the unprepared mind to hold? Perhaps both. But in their secrecy, they preserved something remarkable, the idea that the river of life is within us as much as it is around us. That Heka, the life force, flows not only through temples and rituals but through every heartbeat, every breath, every word spoken with intention. And so the Nile becomes more than a river, more than a myth, more than a symbol. It becomes a mirror. For when we gaze into its waters, we do not merely see the reflection of the sky or the desert. We see ourselves. The great mystery schools of Egypt were not simply centers of learning, they were sanctuaries of transformation. To step into one of these temples was to cross a threshold between the ordinary and the eternal. Outsiders saw only the stone walls, the towering columns carved with gods and stars. But for the chosen few who entered, those walls were veils. Behind them lay a world designed to awaken the soul. Every corridor, every shadow, every ritual was part of an initiation process that mirrored the soul's own journey through life, death, and rebirth. The Egyptians believed that true knowledge could not be given. It had to be earned, lived, and embodied. That is why their teachings were wrapped in symbols, riddles, and tests. The initiate was not simply a student but a participant in cosmic drama. To move deeper into the temple was to move deeper into oneself. One was confronted with fear, with doubt, with temptation. The journey was inward as much as outward. And only by facing the hidden chambers of the self could one unlock the hidden chambers of the divine. The first stages of initiation often began in darkness. The initiate would be led through narrow passageways, blindfolded or in silence, stripped of familiar comforts. Imagine standing alone in a torchlit hall, shadows dancing across walls inscribed with gods of judgment and rebirth. A voice chants from the darkness, "Do you know who you are? Do you know why you have come?" These were not idle questions. They were the beginning of transformation. Each stage mirrored the Egyptian understanding of existence. Just as the soul must cross the duat, the realm of the dead, so too must the initiate pass through trials of shadow and light. They might face fasting, sleepless vigils, or symbolic confrontations with death. In some accounts, initiates were placed inside stone sarcophagi, left in complete stillness as though buried, only to emerge with renewed vision of life. Such rituals were not punishments, they were rehearsals for immortality. If one could face death in life, then life itself became limitless. The walls of the temple were alive with symbols: the scarab beetle, the lotus flower, the ankh, the winged sun disk. These were not decorations. Each symbol was a key, unlocking deeper layers of truth. The initiate was expected to meditate upon them, to see not with the eyes but with the spirit. For example, the scarab beetle, rolling its ball of earth across the sand, was not merely an insect. It was a living parable of the soul, pushing its destiny forward, guided by forces unseen. To recognize this was to step closer to divine vision. Music and sound also played a central role. Priests would chant sacred hymns, their voices resonating against the temple walls until the initiate's very body vibrated. It was believed that certain tones could realign the soul, dissolving illusions and awakening memory of the eternal. This was not entertainment. It was alchemy through vibration. The initiate's mind was retuned like an instrument until it resonated with the harmony of the cosmos itself. But initiation was not only about inner awakening. It was also about responsibility. Those who passed through the temple gates carried a burden. They were entrusted with knowledge that could transform societies, knowledge of healing, of energy, of the soul's immortality. To misuse it was unthinkable. That is why secrecy surrounded the mysteries. Only those proven by discipline, humility, and courage were allowed to proceed. The higher one climbed, the greater the tests became. It was not enough to know the words of power. One had to embody them. Inscriptions hint that many failed these tests. Not everyone was ready to leave behind the world of ego and comfort. But those who succeeded were forever changed. They emerged from the temples not simply as scholars but as living bridges between heaven and earth. Some became healers, others philosophers, others rulers who governed with wisdom rather than fear. The temple mysteries were not an escape from the world. They were a preparation for transforming it. Consider for a moment the great temple of Luxor, whose design some researchers suggest represents the human body itself. To walk its halls was to walk through the anatomy of the cosmos, with each chamber corresponding to an aspect of creation. At the heart stood the Holy of Holies, accessible only to the initiated priest. There, in silence, one confronted the eternal spark of divinity. This was no mere architecture. It was a living map of the human journey, encoded in stone. And yet, the deeper we look, the more we see that these temple initiations were not only for the few. They were models for every human being. The struggles, the questions, the symbolic deaths, they represent what each of us must pass through in our own lives. We all walk the halls of initiation. We all face the shadows, the doubts, the trials of endurance. And we all seek, whether knowingly or not, that final chamber, the place within where the divine spark waits to be seen. The Egyptian mystery schools remind us that life itself is initiation. Every challenge we face, every fear we confront, every act of courage, is a step along the same sacred path. The ancients did not believe enlightenment was reserved for gods. They believed it was the destiny of humanity. The temple was simply a reflection of the greater temple, the world itself, and the soul within it. To the modern eye, these rituals may appear strange, even extreme. But ask yourself, what does it mean to awaken? Is it not to face death and yet live? Is it not to let go of illusions and see truth with clarity? The Egyptians created environments where this awakening was unavoidable, where the soul was stripped bare until only essence remained. And so, the story of the temple initiations is not simply history, it is invitation. The stones still stand. The hieroglyphs still whisper. And if we listen closely, we may hear the same question the initiates once faced in the dark. Do you know who you are? Do you know why you have come? In the shadowed chambers of ancient Egypt, beyond the reach of sunlight, priests performed rituals so precise and so carefully guarded that they were believed to hold the key to life itself. These were not mere ceremonies of religion. They were scientific acts, encoded in layers of symbolism, designed to manipulate energy, the life force the Egyptians believed pulsed through all existence. The heart of their practice was not worship in the way we imagine it today, but transformation. To them, death was not an ending but a crossing, a threshold to another frequency of life. Every ritual, every gesture, every incantation was constructed to guide the soul across that threshold intact, radiant, and reborn. Consider the ritual of the opening of the mouth. Carried out on both statues and mummies, it was more than symbolic. The priests believed that by touching specific points with sacred tools, they could reawaken the senses of the deceased, restoring the ability to breathe, speak, see, and hear in the afterlife. But what if this was not just a ceremony for the dead? Some scholars now speculate that the ritual encoded knowledge of energy channels within the body, an early understanding of what Eastern traditions would later call chakras. The Egyptians, with their profound emphasis on vibration and resonance, may have recognized that the body was a vessel of frequency, and that these rites tuned the vessel for its next phase of existence. Another extraordinary ritual was the daily reenactment of the cosmic battle between light and darkness. In their temples, priests would chant hymns and offer sacrifices to help Ra, the sun god, defeat Apophis, the serpent of chaos, ensuring the sun's rebirth each morning. But hidden beneath the myth was a deeper truth. The Egyptians were enacting the eternal cycle of energy, the oscillation between order and chaos, light and shadow, creation and destruction. By participating in these rituals, they believed they aligned themselves with the pulse of the cosmos, synchronizing their inner life force with the heartbeat of the universe. And then there was the secret use of sound. Hieroglyphic inscriptions and temple acoustics suggest that sound itself was central to Egyptian ritual. Certain chambers, like those within the Great Pyramid, were engineered to amplify specific frequencies. Imagine priests chanting in unison, their voices merging with the stone, creating a resonance that vibrated through the body like a living current. Could these rituals have been designed not just to honor the gods, but to awaken hidden capacities within the human soul? To vibrate the initiate into a higher state of being? Death, for the Egyptians, was the ultimate initiation. The elaborate funerary texts, the pyramid texts, the coffin texts, and eventually the Book of the Dead were not mere prayers. They were manuals of transformation, maps for navigating the afterlife. They taught the soul how to overcome obstacles, how to recognize its own divine nature, and how to merge with the eternal light of Ra. But one of the most striking details is the insistence that the deceased affirm their purity, declaring, "I have not lied. I have not killed. I have not stolen." These declarations were more than moral checklists. They were affirmations of vibration. To ascend, one's frequency had to be light, unburdened by the heaviness of guilt or corruption. In essence, the Egyptians believed that spiritual integrity was a matter of energy. And here lies the most haunting question. Were these rituals designed only for the dead, or were they also performed upon the living, initiates of the mystery schools who sought to conquer death before it came? Some accounts hint that priests and pharaohs underwent mock funerary rites while still alive, experiencing symbolic death and resurrection to transcend fear and awaken to their eternal nature. In this light, Egyptian rituals appear less as acts of superstition and more as profound technologies of consciousness, encoded in myth, drama, and sound. What survived through millennia was not just stone monuments, but fragments of a lost science, a science of life force, resonance, and rebirth. And though much has been hidden or lost, whispers of these practices remain, inviting us to ask, if the Egyptians believed death could be transformed into a doorway, what might their knowledge reveal about the energy that sustains our own lives today? History is not only a record of what is remembered, it is equally the silence of what was deliberately erased. When we turn our eyes to the age after Egypt, we find ourselves walking through the shadows of empire and ambition, where rulers understood that knowledge is the most dangerous weapon of all. They did not always need to destroy civilizations by sword or fire. Often, they simply strangled the flow of wisdom. What we call the Dark Ages was not merely a collapse of cities and kingdoms, it was a carefully orchestrated concealment of the old mysteries. After the splendor of Egypt, The wisdom of the priests and scribes did not disappear overnight. Fragments were carried into Greece, into Persia, into Rome. Pythagoras whispered of Egypt's hidden teachings, Plato spoke of eternal forms, and the Stoics contemplated cosmic law. But the deeper codes, those about vibration, polarity, and the life force that binds all creation, remained carefully guarded. But because kings and priests had learned that if the common man could understand how the universe itself was structured, no empire could bind him. A free mind is more dangerous than a sharpened blade. Rome in particular understood this. The Caesars embraced power through spectacle, through military might, through control of language and law. But behind the pageantry, they also collected knowledge. The Library of Alexandria, once the grandest treasury of wisdom, suffered fire and neglect. Scrolls vanished not by accident, but by choice. What little remained was siphoned into private collections, locked away in temples, or transferred to the burgeoning Vatican archives. And here lies the great irony. The church that claimed to spread light was also the guardian of shadows, sealing away texts that might empower rather than enslave. Consider the rise of Christianity. At its heart were teachings of love, compassion, and the divine spark within every soul. Yet as it transformed from a movement into an institution, the message shifted. The mystical dimension, the Christ who said, "The kingdom of God is within you," was softened, buried beneath dogma. Gospels that spoke of personal awakening were branded heretical. The Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, entire bodies of Gnostic writings were burned or hidden. But because they spoke too directly to the individual's capacity to find God without a priest, a church, or a chain of command. This was no accident. To govern millions, rulers required obedience, not enlightenment. And so, century after century, knowledge was concealed. Even within monasteries, monks copied texts not to share them, but to preserve them in silence. Scholars who whispered of hermetic laws risked exile or execution. Bruno was burned, Galileo silenced. The cost of truth was death. Yet the concealment was never absolute. Like embers beneath ash, fragments of hermetic philosophy continued to glow. Secret societies arose, alchemists, Rosicrucians, Kabbalists, who believed that within the hidden patterns of number and symbol lay the keys to creation itself. They studied in silence, veiled their words in allegory, passed manuscripts hand to hand under threat of the Inquisition. To them, concealment was both prison and protection. If too much was revealed, the hammer of authority would fall. But if preserved, even in whispers, then future generations might yet ignite the flame anew. This duality, the suppression of truth and its careful preservation, is the great paradox of history. Humanity has always walked a knife's edge between control and freedom. The very act of concealment, though born of fear and greed, also ensured survival. Imagine if every scroll of hermetic wisdom had truly been burned. We would not be speaking of these mysteries today. But here is the question that lingers like a ghost. What remains hidden even now? The Vatican Library is said to hold over 80 kilometers of shelving, much of it inaccessible to scholars. Ancient papyri, forbidden gospels, records of civilizations erased from history, all sealed away. What would happen if tomorrow the vaults were opened and the world could read the unfiltered story of its past? Would our understanding of life, death, and the universe shift overnight? Would we recognize ourselves not as lost wanderers but as heirs to a forgotten science of the soul? The concealment was not only external, it seeped into our consciousness. Generations were taught to distrust intuition, to silence inner knowing, to fear what the church branded as occult. And so humanity grew up in chains it could not see, blindfolded by tradition, separated from the truth of its own divinity. The Hermetic law of correspondence, as above, so below, was twisted into superstition. The law of vibration was reduced to meaningless ritual. Knowledge was hidden in plain sight, disguised as myth, allegory, or children's stories. Yet through all of this, the universe itself continued to speak. Symbols carved into stone, myths retold across cultures, celestial patterns written in the night sky, These were the stubborn fingerprints of truth that no empire could erase. And this is where the great concealment failed. Because while men could hide scrolls and burn libraries, they could not silence the stars. The concealment teaches us something profound, that power has always feared awakening. And perhaps that is the greatest evidence of all, that awakening is real, that the Hermetic laws are not mere philosophy, but living keys to freedom. If they were harmless, no king or priest would have bothered to hide them. The very act of suppression is proof of their potency. So as we step further into this journey, we must hold two truths in our mind. 1. That much has been lost, hidden, sealed away in vaults of power. 2. That the essence of it remains alive, encoded in symbols, whispered in myths, and alive in the beating of our own hearts. The concealment may have dimmed the flame, but it never extinguished it. And the real question now is not simply what was hidden, but what we are finally ready to remember. Throughout our exploration of ancient wisdom, from the scrolls of Hermes to the chants of Egyptian priests, one truth continually emerges. Humanity has always stood at the threshold of eternity, peering through a veil that conceals ultimate knowledge. This veil was not placed to torment us, nor to deny us truth, but to protect the unprepared from mysteries too vast to comprehend. For the ancients believed that eternity is not a destination after death. It is the invisible ocean in which we already swim. Every heartbeat, every breath, every fleeting thought vibrates within this eternal field. And yet, most of us remain unaware of it, trapped in the illusion of time. The Egyptians called this veil Meheweret, the great celestial river. To them, it was the current that divided the mortal from the divine. Priests in Memphis taught that when the human soul left its body, it would cross this river, guided by the stars, to face judgment before Osiris. But these same priests whispered a more dangerous secret, that the veil could be pierced not only after death, but during life. Through sacred ritual, meditation, and sound vibration, the soul could glimpse eternity, even while still tethered to flesh. This was the dangerous path of the initiate, those willing to confront eternity without the safety of death. But why pursue such knowledge? The Hermetic texts offer an answer, because the veil of eternity is also the veil of ignorance. To pierce it is to awaken, to realize that time is not a straight line dragging us from birth to death, but a living circle in which past, present, and future coexist. This realization terrifies the unprepared. Imagine for a moment, feeling the weight of every life you have ever lived, every choice you have ever made, cascading upon you in a single instant. Imagine knowing that the actions you take today ripple endlessly across time, shaping futures you cannot yet see. This is why the veil exists. It is both a shield and a test. Across civilizations, this veil was described with eerie similarity. The Greeks spoke of the Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, whose waters erased memory so that souls could reincarnate without the burden of their past. The Persians envisioned Chinvat Bridge, a crossing between worlds so narrow that only the righteous could pass. In Hindu thought, it was Maya, the grand illusion that blinds the soul to Brahman, the eternal reality. And in Hermetic philosophy, it became the great barrier of mind, a fog created by lower vibrations that must be transcended to touch divine consciousness. All of these traditions point to a profound truth. The veil is not merely out there in the heavens, but within us. It is the boundary between the conscious and unconscious mind, between what we allow ourselves to see and what we fear to face. To pierce it requires courage, discipline, and the willingness to shed false identities. For as long as we cling to the belief that we are only flesh, only personality, only circumstance, the veil remains sealed. Ancient initiates trained for decades to prepare for this crossing. In Egypt, they entered tomb-like chambers to simulate death, lying in darkness for days until their senses dissolved. In Greece, the mysteries of Eleusis used sacred potions to dissolve the illusion of time, guiding initiates through visions of eternity. In Tibet, monks trained in Phawa, the practice of consciously exiting the body, to experience eternity before death. These were not mere rituals, they were rehearsals for the ultimate journey. and those who returned carried with them a wisdom that shook empires. Death is not the end, and time is not what it seems. The Kybalion echoes this ancient thread. Nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. To pierce the veil is to see vibration itself, to witness the hidden harmony that connects all things. Imagine standing on a shore and realizing the ocean is not separate from you, that the waves you feared are made of the same water as your blood. This is the vision that eternity offers, the dissolving of separation, the revelation that all is one. Yet even with this knowledge, most never cross the veil. Because the veil also protects us from madness. To see eternity without grounding is to risk shattering the fragile construct of identity. The ancients warned of this. Some initiates who entered the mysteries returned broken, unable to reintegrate with the ordinary world. This is why Hermetic wisdom always paired knowledge with discipline, vision with responsibility. The goal was not escape, but balance, to touch eternity and return with greater compassion, clarity, and purpose. And so, the question arises, can we, in the modern world, pierce this veil? The ancients would answer, yes, for the veil has never disappeared. It lives in the rhythm of your breath, the silence between your thoughts, the dreams you half remember upon waking. Every moment offers a glimpse, if you are willing to pause, listen, and feel. Meditation, deep prayer, conscious breathing. These are the modern echoes of ancient practices, tools to thin the veil until eternity flickers through. But perhaps the most profound teaching of the ancients is this. You do not need to tear the veil away completely to awaken. Even a glimpse is enough. A single vision, a single undeniable experience of eternity can change the course of a life forever. For once you have touched the eternal, the illusions of power, wealth, and fear lose their grip. You begin to live not as a prisoner of time, but as a participant in eternity. This, ultimately, was the promise of Hermeticism and of Egyptian wisdom. That within you, beyond the veil, lies a self untouched by decay, a consciousness that has no beginning and no end. To remember this is to live differently. You forgive more easily because you know you have lived 1,000 times. You love more deeply because you recognize the eternal in every soul. And you fear less because you understand that death is but another doorway. And so, as we conclude this part of our journey, we return to the central Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, as within, so without. The veil of eternity is not a wall, it is a mirror. It shows us that the boundaries we perceive are self-created, and that beyond them lies a truth too vast to name. The question is not whether the veil exists. The question is, are you ready to see through it? Because if you are, then eternity has already begun. Symbols are the hidden alphabet of history. Long before the printing press, long before words were etched onto scrolls, symbols carried truths that words could not contain. To the uninitiated, they appear as simple shapes, circles, triangles, serpents, wings. Yet to those who were trained, these markings were not decoration but revelation. They were maps pointing to the invisible, codes that unlocked the mysteries of existence itself. Consider the Ankh, the Egyptian cross crowned with a loop. To modern eyes, it might appear to be no more than an artistic flourish, a curious relic on tomb walls. But to the priests of Thebes and Memphis, it was the living key to life itself, the merging of masculine and feminine energies, the eternal flow of creation. The loop represented the womb, the source of all beginnings, the staff below, the channel of earthly existence. To hold the Ankh in ritual was to claim mastery over the breath of life, to touch eternity with mortal hands. Then there is the Ouroboros, the serpent devouring its own tail. Across Greece, Egypt, and even in far-off India, this image emerged again and again as if whispered by the cosmos itself. It spoke of cycles, of destruction feeding creation, of endings that were never truly ends but gateways. To the mystics, the Ouroboros was not morbid but divine. It revealed that even in the collapse of worlds, the seed of rebirth was waiting. The Eye of Horus, etched into stone and painted on sarcophagi, was more than protection for the dead. It was mathematics encoded in vision. Every line, every curve corresponded to fractional measurements, a geometry that mirrored the harmony of the universe. The eye watched, but it also calculated, reminding the Egyptians that perception itself was a path to cosmic order. Across oceans, in lands where no Egyptian priest had ever walked, other cultures too preserved their truths in symbols. The spirals of Newgrange in Ireland, the Mayan glyphs carved into temple stone, the labyrinths of Crete, all spoke to the same unbroken language. A circle was never just a circle. A spiral was never just a spiral. They were cosmic fingerprints, left by ancestors who knew that words perish but symbols endure. Why did the ancients choose symbols? Because they knew the danger of direct speech. Words can be burned, outlawed, erased by conquerors. But symbols? They slip through time unnoticed, hiding in plain sight. A conquering empire might destroy temples, but they would not recognize that a simple spiral on a wall carried within it the knowledge of eternity. Thus, wisdom was smuggled forward through ages under the cloak of simplicity. Even today, we live among these ancient whispers. The caduceus, symbol of modern medicine, with its twin serpents twining around a staff, is nothing less than an echo of Hermetic thought, representing duality, healing, and the balance of forces. The pyramid on currency, crowned with the all-seeing eye, is an inheritance from Egyptian priesthoods who believed that power must always be anchored in divine oversight. But perhaps the greatest mystery of symbols is their power to awaken without explanation. A child who gazes upon a mandala, without knowing its origin, feels a stirring. A wanderer who sees the spiral seashell instinctively senses infinity. This is the brilliance of symbols. They bypass intellect and speak directly to the soul. The Hermeticists understood this. They did not write their truths in plain text for the masses. They clothed them in allegory, in sigils, in images that could rest silently on a temple wall until the right eyes gazed upon them. To study Hermeticism, then, is not merely to read. It is to learn this symbolic language and let it reawaken the dormant memories of the spirit. For in the end, symbols are not inventions of man. They are reflections of the universe itself. The circle is the path of planets. The spiral is the pattern of galaxies. The serpent is the eternal cycle of DNA, coiled within every cell. Our ancestors did not create symbols. They discovered them. They were merely recording what eternity had already inscribed into reality. Thus, when we walk among ruins and dismiss the carvings as primitive art, we blind ourselves. Those who carved them knew something we have forgotten, that truth does not always need words. Sometimes, it waits patiently in a symbol, ready to speak when the soul is finally prepared to listen. And so, as we step deeper into the Hermetic mystery, we must train our eyes anew. We must look upon these ancient emblems not as curiosities of dead civilizations, but as living echoes, keys that can still open doors, if only we dare to turn them. Throughout history, we are told that empires rise and empires fall, that rulers wield power through armies, politics, and wealth. But what if the true masters of civilization have always remained hidden? Not kings, not generals, not emperors, but an invisible order, moving silently through time, guiding, shaping, and sometimes manipulating the very course of human destiny. This is not the story you find in schoolbooks. It is whispered in secret societies, encoded in ancient manuscripts, and hinted at in myths that stretch back to the dawn of civilization. It is the story of an order that exists behind the curtains of history, an order whose greatest weapon is not the sword or the crown, but knowledge. For knowledge, as we have seen, is power. Let us step into the shadows. The myth of random history. When we study history, we are taught to see chaos. Wars breaking out because of greed, religions clashing over belief, revolutions igniting because of poverty. And on the surface, this is true. But beneath the surface lies another possibility, that these eruptions of chaos were not entirely random, but sometimes guided, nudged, or even engineered by those who understood the deeper mechanics of power. Take for instance the sudden bursts of scientific discovery. Why did entire civilizations leap forward seemingly overnight, moving from primitive tools to breathtaking monuments that defy our modern engineering? Why did esoteric knowledge appear in the hands of select priesthoods in Egypt, Mesopotamia, or India? Were these simply natural strokes of genius? Or was information being carefully seeded, guarded, and passed down through chosen initiates of a hidden order? The guardians of the flame. Many cultures speak of the keepers of the flame. In Egypt, it was the priesthood of Heliopolis who guarded the solar mysteries of Ra. In Greece, it was the Eleusinian initiates who preserved the hidden rites of Demeter and Persephone. In Mesopotamia, it was the Magi, custodians of star wisdom. And in more modern times, whispers persist of Rosicrucians, Freemasons, and Illuminists carrying forward fragments of the same ancient torch. What connects all these groups is not their outer rituals but their inner commitment to preserve the deepest truths about the human soul, the universe, and the power of vibration, frequency, and consciousness itself. But here lies the paradox. If this invisible order existed to safeguard truth, why did so much of humanity remain in ignorance? Why was the flame hidden instead of shared freely with the world? The answer may be unsettling. Knowledge as a double-edged sword. Knowledge is not neutral. Fire can warm a home or burn a city. The hermetic laws, the secrets of energy and vibration, can elevate a soul or enslave a civilization. Those who held this knowledge knew it could not be entrusted to everyone. To the masses, distracted by survival and fear, it would be dangerous. But to a trained initiate, it could become a path to enlightenment. This is why initiation schools demanded silence, secrecy, and discipline. One had to prove worthy before receiving even a fragment of the hidden wisdom. Not because the teachers were elitist, but because they feared what would happen if raw power fell into unprepared hands. Imagine placing the secrets of nuclear energy into a medieval warlord's arsenal. Would it lead to progress or devastation? In this sense, the invisible order was not merely protecting knowledge. It was protecting humanity from itself. The veil of politics and religion. But here is where the story grows darker. Over centuries, fragments of this wisdom inevitably slipped into the hands of rulers. Some kings, emperors, and popes sought out the secret orders, desiring not enlightenment but control. They wanted the hidden sciences to expand their empires, to control minds, to maintain power over the masses. And so began a dangerous dance, the invisible order preserving truth in the shadows, while political and religious authorities tried to either destroy it or bend it to their will. This is why heretics were burned, why libraries were destroyed, why esoteric schools were driven underground. Not because they were false, but because they were too close to the truth. Think of the burning of the Library of Alexandria, the suppression of the Cathars, the persecution of mystics and alchemists throughout Europe. Were these accidents of intolerance, or carefully orchestrated acts of control? If you were a ruler bent on absolute power, wouldn't you do everything possible to eliminate rival knowledge that could awaken the people you sought to dominate? Threads through time. And yet, the invisible order survived. Through symbols, codes, and allegories, it transmitted its wisdom from age to age. A cathedral ceiling carved with alchemical geometry. A painting that hides hermetic principles in plain sight. A myth that encodes astronomical truths. These were not decorations or stories for amusement. They were encrypted messages, placed for future initiates to discover when the time was right. The Renaissance, for example, did not simply happen. Behind the great explosion of art, science, and philosophy were secret circles of thinkers rediscovering Hermetic texts, preserved through Arabic translations and underground libraries. Leonardo da Vinci, Marsilio Ficino, Giordano Bruno, they were not just geniuses, but recipients of whispers from the invisible order. The same can be said of the Enlightenment. Freemasons and esoteric societies seeded the ideals of liberty, fraternity, and knowledge into revolutions that reshaped the world. Was it coincidence, or the subtle hand of the order once more revealing fragments of its flame? The question of today. If the invisible order truly exists, We must ask, where is it now? Did it dissolve with the Enlightenment, its purpose fulfilled? Or does it still move silently among us, influencing events in ways we cannot see? Some argue that it has split into two paths, one light, one shadow. One branch seeks to awaken humanity, guiding us gently toward higher consciousness. The other, corrupted by greed and ambition, uses the same knowledge for manipulation, surveillance, and control. Could this explain why modern society seems caught between awakening and enslavement, between unprecedented freedom of information and unprecedented systems of control? Perhaps the invisible order is no longer fully hidden. Perhaps it manifests in those rare individuals who rise above the noise, who spark revolutions of thought, who shift collective consciousness with a word, a book, a discovery. Perhaps the order has always been less of a secret organization and more of a timeless current of wisdom, flowing through those prepared to receive it. The great choice. And here we arrive at the heart of the matter. The invisible order is not simply out there, in dusty temples or secret brotherhoods. It is within us. To step into the order is to align oneself with truth, with the hidden laws of the cosmos, with the responsibility that comes with knowledge. The order is invisible because it is not found in outward membership, it is found in inner awakening. The question is not whether such an order exists. The question is, will you recognize its call? Will you allow yourself to see beyond the illusions of history, beyond the distractions of daily life, beyond the narratives fed to you by systems of control? Because in the end, the invisible order cannot be destroyed. It cannot be silenced. It waits in every age for those willing to seek, to knock, to open the door. It waits for those who are ready to bear the weight of knowledge, not as power over others, but as responsibility toward all. The invisible order is not history's secret, it is humanity's destiny.